Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's LEAD workshop. My name is Tirza Watts. I'm the Director of Student Life and Campus Community at CU Denver. And today we're going to talk about decision making. How do you make up your mind in the maze of life? I'm joined today by Courtney Kristen as a co-facilitator, and I'd like to let her introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Courtney. I'm the coordinator for student organizations in student life. I'm also a student here myself and getting my master's in counseling with a focus in higher education and student affairs. I'm excited you're all joining us today to figure out some strategies for decision making together.
So today we have a couple session goals. We want to talk about the methods and challenges that we face when we make decisions. We also want to understand what makes a good decision versus a bad decision. We also want to talk a little bit at the end of our workshop about taking initiative, because once you make a decision, that's only step one. Then you have to put it into action. So our key skill to learn today is decision making. And we'd love for you to grab a pen and a piece of paper.
Decisions everywhere, like that meme showed on the last page. But we have to make a variety of decisions every day. You can have one day and have to make all 5 of these decisions plus 20 more. For example, how do you decide what you want for lunch? It's so hard. You have 2 great options for an internship. How do you go about deciding? And there's a deadline for you to figure that out. You've gone out to dinner with friends. How do you decide to split the bill? There's so many decisions that we make in a day.
So at this point, we'd like for you to get that pen and paper, and we want you to do a reflection activity. And this is a really good one. I've been challenged every time I've had to do this, and it's been a really good thought experiment. What I'd like for you to do is pause the video, and while it's paused, I'd like you to actually write down every decision that you think you've made since you woke up today until you started this video. So that includes from the very beginning when your alarm went off and you had to decide, do I hit the snooze button? So again, pause the video and then come back, and then we'll talk about these 2 discussion questions. Okay, Courtney, so we're going to assume that folks have paused and have come back.
Yeah.
You know, as you think about the list that you wrote, I think about the list I wrote, it's important for us to really think about the specific types of decisions we make. We actually make 3 types every day. So the first one are personal decisions, like what am I going to wear? What am I going to eat? You know, am I going to take the bus or am I going to drive to work today? We then also make decisions every day that are consumer decisions. So let's say I chose to take the bus, but do I get off a block earlier so I can go into Starbucks and buy a drink there, or do I drive to work and I stop at Dunkin' Donuts, right? So there's businesses that we affiliate with or we stop and interact with, and we make decisions there. The third category is actually business decisions. And so in the case of being a staff member, those are all the decisions I make at work each day. What task am I going to do first? And for a student, it's the decisions you make about classwork and interacting with teams and groups and clubs. So there's lots of things that we interact with. And the other thing we have to decide each day is how do we prioritize our decision? So as you're looking at your list, students, of all the decisions you made today, I want you to put a little star by every single decision that you think you had to prioritize above a different one. And then I really want you to look at what were the categories that you came up with.
Okay, so decision making. I'm going to ask Tirza some questions, and if you all want to follow along, and as I ask these questions and you listen to Tirza's response, you think about your response as well. So the first one is, Tirza, what kind of decisions do you make that are unconscious?
Well, to be silly, I would tell you I unconsciously breathe every day. That's a decision my body makes for me.
Yeah.
Decisions that are unconscious. I think sometimes it's how I'm going to respond to something, because we all have a personality type or a leadership style or a communication pattern. And so we do things without thinking of them because that's how we're wired as a human.
Yeah.
So I'm an extrovert, and so I get my energy from being around other people. So I might unconsciously get up and go to your office and say, hey, Courtney, can I eat lunch in your office? I'm bored. Let's talk. And I wouldn't do that, you know, thinking, oh, I should go talk to her because I need to reduce my batteries as an extrovert. I would just do that, right? So that's kind of unconscious.
Natural decision. So what kinds of decisions have you made in the last year that have been conscious, where you've actually thought about the details, the alternatives, the consequences?
I can think of two. The first one is I recently bought a house, and that's a huge financial decision. And so I was renting an apartment here in Denver, and I had to decide, should I make that big financial purchase? And then there's tons of decisions that come with buying a home. Um,
Mhm.
I think another decision that I've recently had to make is figuring out when to travel and when not to travel. That has all kinds of decision making layers, like how am I going to get somewhere? Is it an appropriate time to go visit those folks or to do that activity? So I recently went camping, and so I had a lot of decisions I had to make for my camping trip. Was I going to stay in my friend's pop-up tent, or trailer, or was I going to, dig out my tent I haven't used in 15 years? And I
Okay.
actually went with the tent, and so I had to do a lot of preparation to make sure that that tent I hadn't used for a long time was ready to go. And what did I need to make sure that I was protected from wind and rain? And it rained a lot on our trip, even though we had a great time.
So it's good that you thought about that before, so you could mentally prepare for that.
Absolutely.
So what process did you choose to choose a college?
Ooh, that's a great question. I actually went to college in North Carolina, and I had been looking at two different schools. One I rejected outright because I had to know my major. I had no clue what I wanted to do as a 17-year-old, and I was actually 17 my entire first semester of college. Um, and so I looked at a school that was local. I wasn't quite sure I wanted to go away. But I'll be really honest with you. My dad really liked what the college recruiter had to say at this other school that was 3 hours away. He filled out that application and I signed it. And I filled out for the application that was the college that was 15 minutes from my house. Um, and honestly, the decision was made for me because of finances. The school
Mhm.
3 hours away accepted me as an in-state student, and the school right down the road accepted me as an out-of-state student. We had just moved there. And so I went to the school that accepted me as an in-state student. So
Yeah.
finances really dictated that. And I think that's a reality for a lot of students. So the process kind of chose me. And I will tell you, I had an amazing experience at that school 3 hours away.
Good. It all happens for a reason.
It did. It did.
What are some of the major decisions students need to make?
Definitely, I think one of the big ones is deciding, am I going to work in school? So if I have the financial privilege to not,
Mhm.
how am I going to learn career skills? Because if you do have to work a job or you choose to work a job, you're practicing those skills you need for your career, even if it isn't related to the career area. You're learning
Mhm.
about being on time. You're learning about following through on tasks, how to ask questions when you need clarification, and et cetera. Choosing your major and what you want to actually focus on study wise is another huge one. I'm
Mhm.
definitely someone who changed my major. Did you change yours?
I came in undecided and then chose communication my second semester, but it took me a bit to decide that, and I came in not knowing what I was going to choose.
Do you know, Courtney, I did not realize or remember, and we've worked together for a year now, that you were a communications major. So was I.
Woo!
But that was after I started in special education.
Oh.
So I had investigated that area. So yeah, choosing your major, choosing, am I going to work while I'm in school? I think another big one is choosing to be involved or not. And of course,
Mm.
the Student Life Office, we want every single student to join at least one student organization. Um, the place that you spend your social time, your extra time, I do think that's a major decision because I want to be with and I want students to be with people that are there, as I like to say, you're nerds, the
Yes.
people that get you, or that you're in a student organization where you're really learning something about yourself or others. So I think working, what are you going to be involved in, and actually what you're academically studying.
Yeah, those are huge, three big decisions. I remember making those all myself.
Yep.
Okay, the decision-making environment. So this environment is the collection of information, alternatives, values, preferences available at the time that you're making the decision. So if you made a decision 5 years ago versus where you are today, you would probably have some different either values or information that you've gathered or experiences that you've had along the way that would change that for you. And the decisions that we make can be based on our current state, both our emotional, physical, spiritual. If I'm kind of feeling stuck inside, then it's time for me to go outside, and that's my emotional and physical state. That's like you need to get out there and get some sun. But your decision can change when you have additional information. I don't know about you all, if you've ever had a perspective or you had an opinion about something, and then maybe someone shared a story that shed light on something that you hadn't thought of. So if you have additional information and another perspective, you may change your decision from there. Your decision can also change once you discover other alternatives. So similar to the shedding a light on a different part of the situation, if you look and you find out, hey, I can actually do this to get the same thing done, then you have different alternatives to compare together. And that decision can change once you realize that there are other alternatives. And then your values affect your decision. That's huge. So if you really value family or you really value relationships, then you might make some decisions like, what am I going to do this weekend? You might decide to go drive a half hour to hang out with your family instead of Netflixing on the couch. So those values really affect our decisions as well.
I also know that when you feel uncomfortable after you've made a decision, often that's your intuition saying you've done something that's violated or goes against one of your values. So
Yes.
sometimes that anxiety feeling after the fact may mean that you need to back up and look at your options again. So yeah, pay attention
Do
to
you all
your gut.
ever need help clarifying your values? You can reach out to our office, and we have a bunch of workshops available for clarifying, like, what are my values?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So here's one of the things I think is also important for us to talk about, and those are the things that block us, like they mentally stop us in our tracks when we're trying to make decisions. And so there's a variety that we'll share with you. So one is just being disorganized. You know, maybe you need to get everything organized so you can sit down and get rid of those distractions to then focus. Like I know I used to have to like clean my whole apartment before I could really sit down as a student and then focus on my homework. Because often I had to decide which assignment to prioritize over which one. And so sometimes my thing to distract myself was, you know, I had to deal with the disorganization. Sometimes we don't want to make decisions because we're actually anxious about it. Maybe we lack self-confidence. Maybe we're somebody who's into perfection. And I'm here to tell you, there is no perfect decision and there's no perfect decision-making environment. It's just not going to happen. Sometimes we're actually really dependent on others to help us make big decisions. And so we lack the skill, you know? So like if, let's say you come to college and all the really big decisions have been made, let's say by your parents or by whoever you consider your family, you need to learn the skill of actually going through the alternatives, make the decision, and then jump in and do it. So you have to figure out, how do I depend on others and when do I need to be independent with decision making? Sometimes we're unwilling to consider other options. We've got one option in front of us and we're like, that's the one. And we just stop and we don't look at the other alternatives, which may be better. And so that blocks us because we think there's only one option. And I think probably the last one that I want to comment on is that one right in the middle of the screen. Sometimes we don't want to make a decision because we think something better will come along. So we just drag our feet. Oh, I'll decide that next week. Nope, I'll decide that next week, because we're just crossing our fingers psychologically that something else will make it easier.
But the bottom line is, you will never have a perfect environment or all information to make a decision. So all decisions involve a little bit of risk. Could you be risking losing time, losing money? If you choose to go hang out with your friends instead of doing your homework, is the risk of needing to wake up really early to do your homework before class, is that risk worth the relationship of hanging out with your friends? So you got to kind of weigh what you're willing to risk, because there's always going to be a little bit of risk in every decision.
So true. So let's kind of switch gears. Let's talk about decision-making methods and decision-making models. So there's lots of reactions that you can have when it comes time. So a decision presents itself. Let's go with that example we had earlier in the PowerPoint about you've been offered 2 internships. They're both fabulous. There's a deadline. You have to make a decision. So the first one is that you could agonize over it. So this method has the decision maker taking lots of time and thought and gathering data and analyzing alternatives. The agonizer gets lost in gathering information and weighing alternatives. They never get to the decision phase. I just can't make up my mind. The next one is called the impulsive method or reaction. In this reaction, the decision maker may take the first alternative available without looking at any of the other alternatives or collecting any additional information. People who use this strategy often operate from emotion and move very quickly to the decision phase. Decide now and I'll think about it later. The next one is being intuitive in your reaction. So in this method, you might base the decision on your feelings and emotions, ones that have not been verbalized. So this is your gut talking to you. It feels right to me. The next one is delaying. In this method, you might postpone thought and action on the problem until later. The decider actually never gets started. You just go, I'll think about this tomorrow, and you just put it off. Fatalistic. In this method, you might decide that leaving the decision to the environment or to fate is the best thing to do. Somehow a decision will be made, and so whatever will be, will be. So it's almost like not making a decision is the decision, if that makes sense. Have you heard of that before?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's compliant. So in compliant, in this case, you just kind of go along with the plans of someone else rather than making an independent decision. If it's okay with you, it's okay with me. And then that last one, paralytic. In this method, the decision maker accepts responsibility for a decision, but then is unable to set that kind of decision in motion. They don't know what to do with it. And so this always makes me laugh when we think about the phrase analysis paralysis. Have you ever heard that phrase?
Yes, I have. I've felt it.
Yeah, so I had a friend who was doing their doctorate, and in chapter 2 of your dissertation, it's your literature review. And basically, you're supposed to read every article and book possible on your topic to make sure that you've covered every angle of your topic before you do your research and present what you learned from your investigation. And so I remember having a friend who basically was working on their lit review, aka chapter 2, for 2 years.
Wow.
And finally, I remember him telling me that his faculty member chair said, "You have analysis paralysis, stop the madness," and told him that he wasn't allowed to read any more articles. It was time to go on to the next thing.
Wow.
So he really was worried that I got to read more articles. So that's something to avoid if possible.
Yes. So some decision-making models. So these are ways that we can make decisions. First, pros, cons, or interesting implications. So this, you list the decisions and then you pro, con, and then any specific implications or something different about the situation that is going to happen. And then you select your decision from that list of that pros, cons. Next, we have reactionary. So this is when the problem or crisis in discomfort arises and we resolve it right in that moment. So reactionary, we're not really thinking about it beforehand. We're like, we're gonna wait until the actual crisis arrives and then I'll make that decision right there. Next, we have optimizing. So choosing the best alternative. If you've ever taken an economics course or understand like opportunity cost, that can come into play with optimizing. What am I gaining and what am I losing from making this decision based on besides this one? Next is satisficing. So you choose the first alternative. If I'm really hungry for lunch and there's Arby's right there, that's happening because it's right there in front of my face.
Yep.
So you just choose the first alternative to come your way instead of having to make a bigger decision with more alternatives. Maxi-max. So this one, you evaluate the alternative and you choose the one with the biggest payoff. So you also decide the payoff and like you have to decide what the payoff is. So choosing your major, is the payoff your emotional health, your overall happiness, or are you really wanting to make money and finances is your specific payoff. So you have to decide what the better opportunity is or what the better payoff is for that maxi-max. The next one is maxi-min. So this one you evaluate the alternatives and choose the one with the least potential for disappointment or harm. So you may have like a guaranteed return, but it's maybe smaller than this other decision that you could have made, this other alternative. But you know that this decision is going to be the least harmful to everyone involved. So I'm going to choose this one.
Which one of those do you think you use the most?
I think I use maxi-max and reactionary. Because reactionary, I'll put off decisions on purpose because I'll overthink them. and I'll be like, okay, so there's a couple of alternatives here. I've actually thought through the alternatives, but I'm going to put off making the decision until I'm in the moment to go off my feelings, because I do that a lot. I'm very feelings based. And then max to see which one has the better payoff, or which one I'll get the most out of, for sure.
I think I do the pro cons and the maxi-max. Those are kind of my two go-tos.
Yeah.
Okay. So then we have come to the decision-making basics. So we all love a good acronym. And so if you need one, here's a great one based on the word decide. So first thing, define the problem. What actually do you need to decide? Remove all the clutter. There's usually, if you boil it down, there's a main priority you need to do. So define the problem and then explore it. Okay, so now I know what the decision is I have to make. How do I feel about it, etc. Collect information either on how it impacts you or the situation, how maybe it impacts other people. Interpret that information. What the heck does that information mean? So this is where I think to myself about pros and cons. And then decide what to do. So you might have a list of 3 options. Which one fits best for you? We talked earlier about values often are a good indicator. So which one of these, maybe out of these options, fits my values? And then implement it, because at the end of this acronym, you have to evaluate at a later date. Did that decision work for me?
So a deeper dive into some decision making. First things first, you want to gather as much information as possible. The more information you have, the easier the issue will be to analyze, because you're seeing the full picture of the issue. Next would be outlining the criteria that can help you analyze the problem. So you want to identify the most compelling aspects of the decision you must make. If you outline the criteria, it helps to structure your decisions. Predicting what will happen if you fail to take action. It's really important, but this part can also be anxiety provoking for some of us. So it's important for us to know which method is best for us, and even to kind of sit with the anxiety of what could happen and sit with that to help you make that decision too. But so when you do that prediction, some of the problems, not always, can go away with time. What are the risks of putting off a decision? And then think about all of the consequences. Sometimes a decision produces a good short-term outcome, but makes problems worse in the long run. Think about the possible good and bad that can result from your decision. If you list the advantages and disadvantages or the pro cons on paper, that can make these elements more tangible and easier for you to kind of see and understand. Talk it over, get someone to listen to your strategy. Sometimes an outsider can be more objective in identifying the flaws in the plan. And also, if you just say it out loud, you may realize something that you really want to decide. Like if I ask my partner what we want for dinner between Mexican and Asian, and he says one out loud, I have like a visceral reaction to his decision, and it helps me decide, yes, that's the one I want, or actually, no, I want the other one. I'm really fun. Next would be to sleep on it. And letting your decisions kind of percolate overnight may help you recognize some weaknesses in your approach.
This is one I practice a lot.
Yeah.
When you have really big decisions, it helps sometimes to just make what you think is the decision, go to sleep, and then the next morning revisit it. And you'll either know in your immediate, yep, that was right, or you'll, maybe you dream about it.
Yeah.
But sleeping on it often will help you, I think, intuitively confirm what you know analytically.
Yeah, so if you have the time to sleep on it, you don't have to make the decision until tomorrow. You might as well sleep on it, because you'll probably have, things will come up for you for that. Ooh, avoiding emotional decisions. So making up your mind when you are too upset or really excited, that can lead to trouble. Try not to take action when you're kind of under duress. Have you ever been in a really excited, really social mood, and someone asked you to do something the next day, and you're like, yes, I want to, and then the next day comes, and now you don't feel like it?
Huh? Yep.
That's just kind of an example of where we're at in our emotions in the moment can affect us. Last would be minimizing regrets. So you may be able to see some risk for regret in the decision that you create. Before taking action, think carefully how much regret you can bear about a bad decision.
Okay. So adding on to this kind of deeper dive, I'd love for us to talk about kind of our types and how that impacts us. So for those of you familiar with the MBTI, that's the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. It's your personality type. And so, for instance, how someone makes a decision that's an extrovert, again, this is someone who gets their energy from being around others, and often they're talkative, may look and feel observationally very different from someone who's an introvert who gets their energy from time by themselves, time to reflect and think. And so how they express or go through that decision-making process could look completely different. As an extrovert, I may go and talk to 5 different people about it, but my friend Chris, who's an introvert, may just think about it for a couple weeks and then make a decision. But we both arrive, but it's just going to look differently. So your personality type will impact it. If you've ever done the True Colors instrument, it's also very similar. And so there are traits that come with the different colors. And so we do offer a True Colors workshop in person if you're interested in that one. You know, your leadership style, how you approach leading a group. If you're trying to make a decision for a team, do you make it for them or do you make it with them? So really thinking about not only your leadership style, but how you practice collaboration can impact that. And then how experienced are you at making decisions? We obviously make little decisions all day long, but when it comes to really big decisions where maybe there's a huge amount of time or money, or a payoff that may or may not come through, the more experience you have, the easier it will feel to go through the process. And the more anxious you may feel if you don't have that experience. And so you need to practice, but also gather other people around you to support you during that decision making. Okay, so Courtney, let's transition to talk about groups and teams and how groups and teams make decisions, because in college you make lots of group decisions.
Oh, yeah.
So I want you to reflect for me when you think about experiences in student organizations. And class group projects. Those are probably the 2 types of groups that students are in the most. And students watching the video, we'd love if you'd pause it and also answer this question. The question is, how has it actually gone down? What was your experience in working in a club, in a group, and making decisions, or a class project group and making decisions?
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to my mind is I was in a sorority in my undergrad experience, and then I became the president of that sorority too. And there, you could just tell the difference between a decision that was made with everyone in mind and collecting the opinions of everyone versus someone just making a decision without giving everyone's input, and the impact that that had on the group. I'm troubling thinking of like specific examples right now, but I know in our organization, there are some, like when I was president, and I utilized this a lot because I noticed the person before me did not. Anytime we had to make a big decision, such like event planning and our schedule for the year, if we were going to add a new chair to our executive board, so anything that affects everyone, if we wanted to move our chapter meetings, I wanted to get everyone's input in that so that people aren't kind of feeling like this is a dictatorship, and also that they own the decision so that we all like enjoy it together and we all own it together.
I think that's a great example because when you take the time to get lots of input, it takes longer. So that's something you have to factor into decision making. But you're right, there's more buy-in. What about class projects? What was your experience with how it really went down making decisions in a class project group?
Well, sometimes it wouldn't even happen. Sometimes we wouldn't even talk about, like in a way of like we would decide like who's doing what or what our outline was, but then maybe we didn't communicate deadlines or what our expectations were as the group. So we'd make some decisions and then maybe didn't follow through necessarily with them because we weren't that organized with how it was going around. But sometimes there would also be like one person who's taking charge of the whole situation, and they're like, okay, this is what we're gonna do, you're doing this, you're doing this. And then sometimes there's no one who would speak up. And so it's just kind of like awkward, we're waiting for someone to decide. So there's all those different personalities in there. Like each class project was probably a different decision-making experience. And I just remember a whole dynamic of different situations.
I know as someone who's taught lots of college level academic classes, when I assign a group project, I want them to learn from each other about the topic. But honestly, I also want them to learn how to work with each other, because that's what's going to happen when you get out in the world of work. There's very few people who end up working by themselves. You're often working in groups or teams, or you might work independently on a part of a project, but at some point, the group has to make decisions together about how to carry out the project.
Yeah.
And so there is some strategy as an instructor in asking students to do those group projects. My best experiences have been when the group actually, at the first meeting, sat down and talked about, well, what do you like about group projects and what's your pet peeves?
Yes.
So I know that I got so frustrated with group projects as an undergraduate that when I became a college level instructor, I always planned time in my class when I assigned the project, the rest of the class period is to do that work. And so I actually give them a facilitated list of questions that the whole group has to talk about before they talk about the project.
That's
What do you like about group projects? What's your pet peeves? What's your work schedule? How many credit hours are you carrying? Like, when do you have free time to actually work on this project?
Yeah.
Do we want to work on it through Zoom, or do we want to meet up at the library, or do we want to just email each other? Like, how are we going to communicate so that we all feel good about the project? And if a group does that, they often have really great experiences. If they don't, group projects can be a decision-making nightmare, and not feel good at all.
Yeah. I know in my master's experience now, something that really hit a chord for me and was an awesome experience for our group is we talked about our expectations. And then we also talked about what are our expectations if we don't meet these expectations. So if talking about hey, life does happen and sometimes we might not meet this deadline. If you are feeling like you're not going to meet the deadline, if you could let us know beforehand and come up with a new deadline instead of after the fact, then if that does happen, then the person who maybe something came up in life and they just weren't able to meet the deadline, they don't have to feel as guilty because they're like, okay, we have a plan. It's all right if people don't necessarily meet the deadline. We just have to figure out what to do from there. So that was really helpful. What are expectations? What are expectations when we don't meet the expectation?
Do you know what the biggest decision was in that scenario? To choose to communicate, and I'm sure there's micro decisions. Am I going to communicate honestly and positively with my group teammates?
Yes.
Yeah. So my last question before we move on, when you think about decision making as a first-year college student versus your last year of college, how did the experience of decision making change in those couple of years?
Well, it's kind of like what you mentioned before, about hey, what do you like about group projects? What is your pet peeve? I think the first year, we would either let someone take charge and maybe other people weren't feeling as involved in the project, or no one would take charge, and then things would just kind of, the deadline would approach really quickly without us getting anything done. But then more towards the end, we were more organized with our decision making. So we assigned things to individuals, and we all talked more openly about what our expectations are. And we were just way more communicative towards the end than we were in the beginning.
So students watching this video, if you need advice on how to make decisions in your student orgs, we would be happy. Go to Courtney, come to me, either one of us. We'd be happy to help you talk through how do I actually do this in a student organization well. Because as we've both shared, it's a learning process, and you learn more the longer that you're in school. Okay, so we're going to transition at this time and really talk about 3 different models or methods you can use when working with a group. And so, Courtney, would you tell us about the 5 whys problem-solving method?
Yeah, I really like this one. So the 5 whys, you're troubleshooting the problem. You're wanting to get to the root of the problem to figure out okay, what actions can I take to fix the issue? Well, first things first, you want to figure out the root. What's really the big problem that we can take action on? Instead of just band-aiding something, we want to get to the real root. When you're pulling out a weed and you don't get the root of that,
it comes back.
It comes back 3 days later. But if you really get the root out, then you don't have to worry about it necessarily. So the 5 whys, first things first, you bring everyone together to identify and define the problem. And then you ask why at least 5 times to get you to that center issue. So you ask the first why. You ask why 4 more times, framing the question from the previous why. And we have an example that we'll show you. And then you find the root issue, and then you take some action towards that root issue. So the example we have is that we have low attendance at our student organization meetings and events. That's the big problem. Why? Because they don't know when they take place. And why don't they know when they take place? Because we don't have a published calendar of events. And why haven't we published a calendar of events yet? Because no one is posting or updating our events in MyLinks. Why has that not happened? Because our events chair position is vacant and no one's in that position. And why is that position vacant? Because we haven't advertised the elections process to our members. So what are those countermeasures? What are those action steps we can do? We can assign a club member to create and advertise the elections process before the next meeting. And we can assign someone to update the events in MyLinks to another officer until that position is filled.
Excellent.
So we asked like 5 whys to get to that root problem.
Awesome. I think this is a great thing because I don't think we often think about digging deeper. We might even make a bunch of decisions about a surface issue and then it just doesn't go away. It's because we needed to dig back down a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
So the next method, oh, go ahead.
Well, for that last example, like if you were like, okay, what's the problem? We have low attendance. If you started like, okay, they don't know when they take place, let's just put them all in MyLinks right now. But if you don't make a plan to sustain that in the future, to assign someone to make sure they're putting your events in MyLinks and to have a position to make sure that that's happening, then again, that's just a Band-Aid on the issue. It'll happen again.
Exactly. Okay, so let's move on to the Zig Zag problem solving method. So earlier I mentioned the Myers-Briggs type indicator. So you actually have 4 types that make up your personality type. So there's how do you get your energy? That's your first letter. Your second letter is how you take in information. And so that's actually sensing and intuition. So you either take in information based on the details and the facts, or you take them in based on patterns and hunches. Your third letter in your type is how you make decisions. And so that's thinking and feeling. You either decide based on analysis and logic, or maybe you decide on feeling, which is more about harmony of relationships, values of the group, or my values, and how does that feel to make that decision and choice. And then your last letter is called the lifestyle letter. And so it's judging or perceiving. And so that is really about kind of how you live your life. Are you orderly and organized, or are you a go with the flow person? In the zigzag problem solving method, we actually pay attention to your 2 middle letters. So we start with having your entire group gather and do all the sensing functions. So maybe you make a list of 30 different facts about your problem. What are the details? What are the constraints? What might be in the way of us making the decision? So let's say on a chalkboard in the classroom your club's meeting in, you make this big long list of all the details. Then as a group, you slide over to intuition, and you're going to look for what are the themes in this big long list? What are the patterns? What are the relationships? So you may look at this long list and go, wow, there's 7 patterns, 7 themes. So you write out what those themes are next to that list on the chalkboard. Then as a group, you slide down to thinking. Well, let's analyze these 7 themes. What are the issues related to them? What are the pros and cons of each one of these themes? What kind of assumptions are we making? Which one would be more of a priority? And then lastly, you slide over and you talk about how does each one of those themes and the details, the analysis, feel to the group. So then after you've kind of gone through what values of our club or organization is represented in each one of these and which ones feels best to the group, then you vote and make a decision. Okay, so you work through this, and so at all times or throughout the whole process, each person has 2 parts of their personality type activated. So for instance, I'm an ESFJ. So when we're doing the S part, the sensing, I'm going to be all in. But I'm a feeler, the last step. And so I'm going to have to pay attention during the intuition and the thinking pieces because those don't come to me or I don't practice that as often, but I'm going to be all in during sensing and feeling. And so everybody's going to be able to participate at a high level in at least 2 portions of this.
That's awesome. Ooh, next is the 6 thinking hats. So we've got a little video for you, and then we'll dive into more info about it.
Brainy Dose presents the 6 thinking hats technique for problem solving. Everyone has instincts, with some taking a positive approach to problem solving, while others are more acquainted with a critical standpoint. Both ways of making decisions are useful, but they both also have their downfalls. The 6 thinking hats technique takes points from both of these views. In fact, this technique separates thinking into 6 defined roles. With these roles, you can formulate the best possible solution to any problem. Let's explore the 6 thinking hats and what they represent. Number 1, white hat. The white hat represents just the facts in any given situation. This hat is used first and foremost to state the obvious in the material. Factual information can be used to help find a solution by looking at what you have and noticing what is absent. Questions to ask when wearing the white hat can include, what information do I have about the issue? What does it tell me? What information do I lack? What information would I like to have? How am I going to get it? Now, after the facts are stated, you will need to become a bit more creative. If you're coming from this standpoint and only this standpoint, you will be limited to what exists and what does not. Number 2, red hat. This hat is utilized when an emotional way of thinking is present. This is where your intuition comes into play, as you start to judge things by the vibes you get from them. The red hat allows you to express your feelings without having to offer a rational explanation. For example, I just don't think that idea will work. I have a good feeling about doing it this way. I've got a hunch that demand for this product is about to fall. Although the red hat goes by this powerful emotion, you have to be careful to keep a certain amount of control over the red hat mentality. Number 3, yellow hat. On a positive note, the yellow hat is optimistic, making us see the best and nothing less. This mindset tries to see all the good things in certain situations. Even if it's a severe problem, those who think with this mindset will see something that benefits them or others, even in its most minute form. One of the best things about the yellow hat? It has the power to keep you going when things get unbearably tough. Number 4, black hat. On the flip side of the yellow hat thinking model, you get the black hat. The way the black hat works is by forcing you to think negatively in order to weed out potential future problems. For instance, would you really want to head into a situation thinking in only a blind positive manner? It's important to understand that things can go wrong. There's always fine print, and you must have a plan B. This is exactly how the black hat works. Number 5, green hat. The green hat allows you to do something interesting in the midst of your problems or specific situations. This hat governs all creative thoughts that can help you alter, fix, or accept the given issues. Questions to ask when wearing the green hat can include, is there a new way I could do this? What about approaching the issue from the opposite viewpoint? Are there any alternatives I haven't yet considered? This creativity is needed in order to see things outside the box. Without it, you may miss some of life's most extraordinary and unlikely solutions. Number 6, blue hat. This hat is used for process control. When you're facing a problem and utilizing logic and positive thinking, the blue hat mentality will be able to lead you over to creative ideas with the green hat, or even your worst case scenarios navigated by the black hat mindset. The blue hat may even suggest that you use your basic intuition while wearing the red hat when all avenues have been exhausted. The blue hat is so important. It helps you stay in control during the whole decision-making process. While you were probably aware of all these ways of thinking, you may not have labeled them as colored hats. Not all of these hats are popular ways of thinking either. In fact, a huge flaw in problem solving is usually not to think negatively or not to follow emotions. However, leaving these things out of the equation can limit your abilities and goals. In order to see dangers ahead or possible failures, we must have a bit of negative critical thinking. In order to trust our intuition, we must use it as well. As far as creativity goes, some of the greatest achievements have come from unconventional thought processes. Wouldn't you agree? Hopefully this video has allowed you to see just how important each of the 6 thinking hats are in the decision-making process. The next time you are faced with changes and options, make sure you exhaust the 6 thinking hats and reap the best possible outcome from your situation. Good luck and good thinking. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends so we can.
All right.
The good luck on decision making, because it can be complicated. But the 6 thinking hats, they can help us in a couple ways. So we can, let's say we have a group, we have a decision we can make. We can present the 6 thinking hats right from the beginning and go one by one and say, okay, like let's tackle this from white hat, red hat, and then kind of go down the line. So that's one way that you can utilize it as a group. If you, an individual, need to make a decision, you can also, you may gravitate more towards a specific hat in a different situation. Like I think I'm very yellow and red depending on the situation and who I'm around. But if you know that you tend to think that way, you can put on the other hats to make sure that you're looking at a situation from all different angles and that you're getting everything you need to make the final decision.
I recently went on a retreat, and the facilitator actually physically brought a hat of every color. And the way I saw him use this with that group of students was he passed out a hat, and so 1 or 2 students had to represent that view, and one of them was wearing it. And it was a very visual way to get folks into the mindset. But I think you're right. You could have a handout or something that you keep in your officer's, notebook, and that helps guide you as you lead your group through this. So I think this is a really great method and way to make sure you look at all sides before the group makes a decision. Okay, so we are at that point in our workshop where we've gone through decision-making models personally, our reactions, how you can make decisions as a group. You've made a decision. We're going to transition to now what do? You have to actually take initiative. You got to do something with that decision. And so, when you take initiative, you got to start with a baby step, right? A journey of 1,000 miles begins with 1 step. So sometimes you then have to make an action plan. And so then you just have to start the process. So I always encourage people, once the decision's made, make a to-do list. So I love this. I found this quote in this image. Initiative is all about taking charge, and initiative is the first in a series of actions. Initiative can also mean a personal quality that shows a willingness to get things done and take responsibility. So you have to be an initiative person. And initiative is the start of something with the hope that it will continue.
And here are some steps to take initiative. First things first, let's think outside the box to, again, make sure we're gathering all the different information, alternatives, what our values are, whose values would be affected by this decision. So think outside the box and make sure you're looking at it from all different angles. Do your homework. So again, with that information gathering piece, that's really important there. And then actually take action. So that taking action piece is the initiative and making something happen. But these last ones, it's important to capitalize on opportunities. I think there's a quote out there that says like success is taking action on opportunities when they present themselves. So that kind of combines those two, that like when opportunities come up, make sure you're capitalizing on those. And then once you've taken the action, once you've like made that initiative, make improvements. Think about what you've done and how you can improve it better next time. And I would say most importantly, perseverance and persistence. It's really important to keep going even if you feel like you've failed. Even if you feel like you can make way more improvements, and maybe those improvements are overwhelming because like we would be redesigning the entire thing, or there's a lot to change. If we keep that perseverance and persistence, then we'll be able to make that change, make things happen, I have an example of, let's say we had like a carnival each year. In the first year, we only had like 3 student organizations show up. The next year, we had like only 15 show up, but we're still like making those improvements. If you get frustrated that you go back down to 12 organizations showing up, year 5, you might partner with someone else and a different campus partner, and you might have 40 organizations plus some campus departments and things along those lines. So if you keep that perseverance and persistence, it can become beautiful.
Awesome. Thank you. Great example. So folks, that actually wraps up our workshop on decision making. We hope that you've learned a few things. Certainly, we want you to reflect on what kind of decisions you need to make. And so we've got a challenge for you. We want you to practice making a decision. And we want to encourage you to back the video up and look at those decision-making models and choose one of those methods and then put it into practice. And then once you've made your decision, make a plan and take initiative, because practice makes perfect. If you'd like attendance credit for this workshop, there will be a Google form that you can click and fill out. It will only take you a few minutes, and it will be listed in the description below the video. So, and we'd also ask you to subscribe to the Student Life YouTube channel. We would appreciate your vote of positivity by subscribing. Any closing comments, Courtney?
I think decisions will never go away. I know they will never go away. But again, like, come back to these models, because you may have a decision right now that these models are useful for, but a decision may come up a year down the line, a couple months down the line. Come back to this, or at least Google the 6 thinking hats method, and look, and like, there's options out there. So if you're not confident that you're making the best decision or that you have all the information, come back to these models and use them, because they're really helpful to have some structure.
Very true. So before we close our video, we do want to share with you, we used a number of resources, and I want to give a shout out to mindtools.com. It's a great website with lots of information to support your development as a leadership oriented student. So thank you so much for joining us today.